Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all feeling well. My name is Charlene Vinal and I work here at Oxford University Press. So I'll be your host for today's session, and this session is going to explore the language gap in Australian students' writing. On behalf of everyone here at Oxford, I'd really like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be with us today. However, before we get started, there's a bit of housekeeping I'd like to cover. So as you can see, if you could turn off your cameras and your microphones, that would be a great help to us because we are recording today's event. During this session, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions via the chat box, and also at the end of the session, we'll provide you with an email address where you'll be able to request a certificate of attendance. So what we'll cover in today's session is the National Writing Standards. We'll look at what our research is showing and telling us. We'll hear about some practical support for teachers, and we'll look at some ways that you can improve student writing. And of course, at the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. So joining us today, our esteemed panel of presenters are Lee Walker, Director of Publishing, Editorial and Design here at Oxford, Anne Bayetto, Lecturer at Flinders University College of Education, and Anne is joining us today with some special audio commentary. And of course, we also have Shane Hill, the founder and creator of Schoolbow and the Writing Legends platform, among many other very successful digital platforms. So with great pleasure, I'd like to hand you over now to Lee.
And it's really good to be with you all today, and thank you very much for joining us. Just a little bit about Oxford University Press. At Oxford, we believe in the power of the written word and the scholarship that stands behind it. Everything we publish relates directly to our mission to support Oxford University's objective of excellence in research, scholarship and education. And it's probably the very key reason why I just love to work at Oxford. So to illustrate this statement today, we'd like to introduce you to Oxford Children's Language Australia, and which this research that we're presenting to you today is part of. So we're just going to play you a video.
Language is at the heart of education, but in a rapidly changing world, it continues to evolve. Since 1908, Oxford University Press has supported Australian educators in developing children's language and literacy skills, with insights and learning resources underpinned by research and pedagogy.
Today, we're proud to partner with leading Australian language and literacy research experts to further our collective understanding of Australian children's language, share evidence-based research, insights and advice, and support the education community in developing our children's language and literacy skills. Join us at the home of Australian children's language. Great. So let me introduce our latest language research with some context about our national writing standards. In 2019, NAPLAN for Writing revealed that more than 96% of Year 3 students across Australia met or exceeded the national minimum standard, and for Year 5 it was close to 93%, so a small downward trend. However, the number of students at or above the national minimum standard in Year 7 dropped to less than 90%, and in Year 9 it fell again to less than 83%, so quite a significant gap, telling us that more than 17% of our Year 9 students were likely challenged with the process of writing well. On the screen right now, you see a few quotes from the media, including The Conversation and the Sydney Morning Herald. And I think we all agree that NAPLAN doesn't teach good writing, you as educators do, and that to be ready for a more STEM-focused future, our students need to be proficient, independent writers to be able to access better life opportunities. So what the NAPLAN data does challenge us to think about is how we're currently teaching writing, how we might help our students achieve better results, and how we might need to help close the language gap that the national assessment data does show us. And I think it's really important to note that with teaching and learning, as you know, quite significantly disrupted and NAPLAN cancelled in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it will be really important to see the results of this year's testing, what the gap might look like, and how these latest results might further impact our thinking and the action that we all might need to take. Next slide, please. So what does our research show? We hope you've had the opportunity to read our latest research, but don't worry if you haven't, because that's what we're talking about today. And what I'll do in a moment is highlight a couple of the most salient points for you. So our language analysis suggests that there is a major diversion in writing proficiency at a very clear moment in time, the commencement of secondary school, and especially for boys. In years 3 to 6, boys and girls show a consistent increase in the use of more sophisticated language, which is great. But from year 7, boys' use of language starts to decline, whereas girls' language repertoires continue to increase. So start having a think about that. Why do you think there is a decline in boys' writing in year 7? From your experience, do they disengage with the writing process at this age, or don't they? Do you think social norms might be affecting their motivation to write, as Shane Hill, who you'll hear from soon, suggests in the research paper? And do you think boys require more explicit teaching? So as you're listening to the presentation over the next half an hour, feel free to write your comments in the chat box, and feel free to start chatting to each other about why you might think this is happening in terms of the transition from year 6 to year 7, and especially with boys. So let me talk a little bit about the language students are using to construct their writing. And just as a bit of a context, this language research is based on more than 50,000 writing samples and almost 20 million words. So we've got a lot of data that we've been able to draw these conclusions from. So while the NAPLAN data provides the overarching scores, our research delved into students' writing, and we were able to analyse the language they use to construct their writing. So I've got a few facts for you, especially from year 7. Girls use more adjectives than boys. Boys' verbs use declines, and girls use more descriptive verbs. Girls are more likely than boys to use commas to construct their writing. And boys consistently make more spelling mistakes than girls, and with the gap widening, especially at year 7. So some really interesting insights there. Our research also revealed the themes students write about. And what was evident is that the gender stereotypes pervade students' writing in years 3 to 6 or 3 to 8, which is the data that we have, and which also mirrored the Oxford Wordless research we conducted with the younger years F2 cohort back in 2018. So those gender stereotypes persist right through the primary years and into the lower secondary years. So how might we reflect on this evidence in our roles as teachers, and how might we best be able to influence students' learning and development? And let me share this really interesting insight with you, and just think about what's going on in society at the moment when it comes to boys and girls. And I'm trying not to be too provocative, but what's happening at the moment is fairly heated across all parts of society. In their writing, boys are more action-oriented than girls and have a greater tendency to resolve matters with violence. They are twice as likely as girls to use the word hit and punch, and which often lead to characters dying. Now, I do understand that the gaming and being on screen has a big impact on what boys are writing about, but violence really does pervade a lot of their writing. Whereas girls, and you're probably not surprised, or maybe you are surprised about this, they are significantly more likely than boys to describe interactions and relationships between characters and to convey emotions. And girls are more likely to use words such as friend, family, and kind, even words such as mean, because they're trying to describe and they're trying to unpack their characters and navigate those characters' journeys. To describe the interplay of those characters. So really, really interesting to think about that. So this leads us, and it led us in our research report to really focus on the importance of the explicit teaching of writing and how we need to be a lot more explicit in the teaching of writing. And in a moment, I'll pass you over to Anne, who'll provide you with some really fantastic guidance for the explicit teaching of writing. And as Tessa DeVerne, one of Oxford's authors, and Noella Mackenzie, in an article written by Graham called Changing How Writing is Taught, suggest, the ability to write clearly and purposefully continues to be a critical ingredient for educational success. At school, writing is the principal means by which students both learn and demonstrate what they have learned. Many students are really good at writing. They're really very good. They possess mastery of the craft and they can write sophisticated, purposeful texts. And we see those kids every day writing really engaging texts. I've read hundreds, I won't say thousands, Shane, but I've read hundreds of writing legend stories. I've read hundreds of Storyathon micro stories. But for many other students, a lack of writing ability means they struggle to show what they know, and their learning remains untapped or unseen. So this writing challenge, we are so empowered to help close that language gap in Australian students' writing. Again, it's really great to see you all here today. But I'm going to pass over to Anne now, virtually. She's not actually here today, but she's recorded a great session for you to listen or to think about some practical ways you can improve students' writing. So I'll now pass over to Anne. Next slide.
To be able to teach writing, teachers must also be writers. It is very difficult to convince students that learning to write is important if teachers can't demonstrate that they are writers too. So, when did you last try writing what you ask your students to write? For example, a narrative, recount or information report. Also, there needs to be a mix of allocated time for teaching the components of writing, authoring, revisioning and editing, while also factoring in brief occasions for writing. More about this later. When looking at the evidence-informed research and commentary, it indicates that teachers need to immediately double the amount of writing that students do. If a lens was put over a typical school day, it would expectedly show that students do very little writing in any learning area. Overall, students must be brought to an understanding that while writing is the more complex of the literary skills, everyone is challenged when doing it. If they complain that writing is hard, then respond by inviting them to join the club. Just like learning a sport or musical instrument, becoming an independent and skilled writer requires significant amounts of guided instruction and coaching and substantial amounts of ongoing practice. So, teachers break the writing process into manageable steps and scaffold students' learning by modelling and doing shared writing prior to asking students to mimic the approaches they used. Once students have some degree of confidence and independence, they are then able to play around with their writing. How important is oral language competency to build writing skills? If students don't speak the vocabulary and use the correct grammar, then they are unlikely to miraculously start using more sophisticated words, write compound sentences, or stay with the correct tense. That is, what you speak is what you can draw upon when you write. However, and further, students need to be brought to an understanding that they can use their thoughts and discussions to guide planning of their writing, but that writing has particular shared conventions that need to be used for readers to be able to access the text. Students learn more new words by reading and being read to than listening to adults speak. But this is not enough. All students, whatever their year level, also need to be specifically taught new words. Many of you will be familiar with the notable research by Beck, McCowan and Kukin regarding Tier 1, 2 and 3 words, and the importance of teaching students Tier 2 words that mature speakers, writers and readers use. Any introduction of new vocabulary must include explicit instruction about a word's meaning or meanings, and how the word may be used when speaking and later when writing. Advisedly, students need at least a dozen varied opportunities to use a word so it becomes part of their lexicon. How can teachers build writing confidence? Students need to see teachers struggling with the writing process themselves, which I might say is not that hard to do, so they can better understand how teachers go about it. All writers move through what we could call the cycle of create, compose, correct, where they roughly plan what they are about to write, get something onto the page or screen, and then consistently revision and edit what they have done. Also, teachers need to offer more low-stakes, joyful writing opportunities. A teacher friend of mine recently commented, and it was one of many comments that I have received, that her school was so focused on teaching text types that it had got to the point where students complained and resisted when asked to write. While we understand that text types do need to be taught as part of Australian curriculum requirements, teachers also need to build in times for what I call whimsical writing. For example, Room 10, find a piece of paper and write a love letter to your teeth. Write 3 reasons about why we need tomatoes. Write for me 2 things you are good at. After writing, they would read them to a peer. These are not collected or marked. It's about getting students ready and willing to do more writing. And of course, don't forget to write as well. Every text type has its own requirements, and knowing, for example, how information reports should be structured requires teachers to know how to teach the text type. This is when a really useful reference book is a teacher's best friend. For years, I have relied on 2 texts, and coincidentally, they are Oxford University Press publications, Right Ways and Writing in the Right Direction. Advisedly, teachers would start with the more predictable and safer text types to build confidence, and these are the text types of recounts, descriptions, information reports and procedures, before moving on to the more challenging expositions, discussions and narratives. We want students to feel optimistic about their writing abilities, so we start small, we start safe, and then we build their stamina.
Hi everyone. There's just so many incredible nuggets that Anne has put there. I've now listened to that a couple of times, and I certainly feel as though I could go back to it a number of other times in terms of the wonderful tips that she's placed in there. Just picking up on a couple. One of the things that really stands out to me is the doubling of writing as the whole. And so that real question in terms of, are our students writing enough? I think a lot of the research that's out there is suggesting 30 minutes per day most days, and so is that clearly taking place in the classrooms? I think another one that really struck a chord for me is that teachers must be writers. And so the modelling of writing, the willingness to model, to have that up on the board and be writing together, mistakes and all, but as the really fun experience, is a critical tip. Now, the next little bit, I'm just going to look at a couple of the things that I guess have underpinned what we've tried to do in the creation of Writing Legends, which builds upon Storyathon. So there are 2 parts of what we've created from a technology perspective in terms of, well, how could that assist in the writing process? So Storyathon, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is basically where the children are challenged to write a 100-word microstory. Over the last year and a half, the students have written over 100,000 stories across Australia and New Zealand. So we're incredibly pleased with that. And one of the most pleasing aspects is the fact that the students, more than 90% of the students have said that they've enjoyed the experience. So I think writing for enjoyment is such a key part of it. When I been into many classrooms, I always ask the students in terms of just how much they enjoy their writing and do they see themselves as writers. Now, sadly, very often I find that that's not the case, that the enjoyment doesn't seem to be there. So a very big part of what we've been trying to do is to create the situations where they do enjoy their writing. So much of that then does come down to writing activities that the children feel excited about. I think one of the challenges is to what degree you create that situation versus the student agency in terms of them being able to steer that. It's always a challenge in terms of the degree of choice or the degree of guidance that you give towards that, and whether that's at an individual level or at a whole level. One of the things that we're certainly seeing is when left purely to the child, their breadth of writing will be quite limited in terms of the topics that they choose. And as Lee mentioned before, the tendency of the boys to write about boy type things and to bring action and often fighting into winners and losers into the writing certainly comes about. So I guess my position on this one is continue to try to find extremely motivating pieces to write on and situations where they can write, but the appropriate degree of variation. Another thing that did come through in the data that Lee didn't mention, but it's a really important one, is the use of male and female characters in stories. For year 3 and 4 boys, if they're not explicitly instructed to include a female character in their story, then almost always they won't. The only exception to that is their mother. So mums appear in stories approximately 3 times more than dads. But a lot of the writing experiences, I think it is important to craft it involving a blend of characters, a diversity to be coming through. The second part that I think really underpins what we're trying to do is to create those environments that maximize the chances of successful writing. So hopefully at the end of that writing period, they have something that they can genuinely be proud of. And that ideally is better than they imagined it would be before they started. So what that really means is so much scaffolding that takes place, and how do we provide the appropriate support structures and to get them going to overcome all of the obstacles that are there otherwise. If in the writing programs or any writing experiences that you're doing, if the children at the end of it are embarrassed or feel as though what they've created is poor, then it's likely to be a more negative experience than positive. So I think anything that you can do to have the students at the end of it being proud of what they've created, I think that is so critical. Technology enables us to pull together some smart tools. So we're still in our infancy in really working out exactly what that is in terms of just how can we take what the students are writing and feed it back to both the students and the teachers to dramatically increase those writing outcomes, either for the individual or the class or the groups within the class. But I think this is a very exciting area, and certainly the data that's come through from that we've been researching here has already provided some tremendous insights in terms of how we can improve the teaching and learning of writing. If we can jump to the next slide. So here's just something that really emphasizes, I guess, some of the support structures that we try to give. Now, you've got your writing prompt, and hopefully it's an engaging one for the students. You've got some tips, but then in particular the annotated exemplar. So an at-level piece for the students to look at, and in particular then the annotations in terms of what are the various techniques that the writer is using in order to strengthen the piece. Now, I'd still go back to what Anne has said, because I think that wherever possible, that in the class and the teachers able to also jump in and write, because the modelled exemplars that we supply, well, that's just one, and there are obviously thousands of ways to write a response to this. And so just can't emphasize enough the benefits and advantages of when the teachers feel willing to do that in front of the class. If we can jump to the next one, please. What we've got on the screen here are just a couple of examples of the sorts of tools that the smart analytics that we think can help in the teaching and learning of writing. The first on the left is basically a spelling breakdown. So one of the things that we've tried to do is to see exactly what the students are writing. Then we match it with what we think that the word that we think that they're trying to spell in there, and they're able to, and the students are then able to see that, and the teacher's able to see it. And very quickly you build up that profile of the student in terms of exactly in the case of spelling, what are the precise things that the teacher is able to come in and assist with, or that are able to be dealt independently by the student depending on their age and ability. The second one over on the right hand side is in terms of the vocabulary. So I think another point that Anne said there that's incredibly insightful in saying that in general a child has to use a word 12 times in order for it to truly become part of their vocabulary. And so we see in the data that half of all words written by students generally comes from an incredibly small set of only around about 70 words. So the other half of all the words that they're using, which usually for most students probably takes them out to about 1,000 words, so those other 930 words is constituting their other 50%. But most of those they're not using 12 times, and so very occasionally, and the words aren't necessarily being sufficiently embedded into the child's vocabulary. So in terms of what we try to do on the program is we try to sort of encourage and prioritize those tier 2 words that Anne was mentioning. But I think in listening to Anne there, I think again one of the ways that we can maybe try to do more on this is to not just the once, but to continue to sort of see those newer words coming through in the child's vocabulary. The example that I've put up there is often for the weaker or less sophisticated writers, they're overusing particular words. And so I think that's quite a cool way that we're able to look at the data across the system and then pare it back down to the individual. So in this particular case, if looking at a word such as said, which is often teachers are trying to get the students to use less of or to use alternatives for, we can see that in this class, this particular student, Amy, is using the word said 10.5 times more than the average year 6 student. So that's a classic case where the teacher's able to then get in and provide some very specific advice to Amy on those alternatives. If we can jump to the next slide. So I'm now jumping back really in terms of what Lee was picking up before in terms of the gender writing divide. So what this is looking at is the NAPLAN figures just broken down by boys and girls, and in particular the percentage of the students that are above or at minimum national standard. And so we can clearly see that it's going down over time, but in particular the gap between the boys and the girls is widening, and so looking at that, I mean, you've got almost a quarter of boys that are not at minimum standard for writing come year 9. And yeah, as you can see the comment below, we fundamentally don't accept that that's boys' destiny, that they'll underachieve in writing, because certainly we know that they're capable of far more. But we need to look at whatever strategies that we can to try to stop such a gap. If you can jump to the next one. So one of the things that we've done with Oxford University Press is basically brought together a writing pledge where there's over $500,000 in resources that we're pledging. But what is part of the pledge really is that each student then makes a pledge to write 10,000 words over the year. Now, 10,000 words can of course sound relatively daunting. When broken down by 40 school weeks, that's only 250 words per week. So it's not something that's difficult to achieve. And again, if you go back to Anne saying that the quantity of writing for most schools needs to be doubled, then certainly that is eminently achievable in terms of the 10,000 words. As part of it, there's a combination of things that the schools are able to have in terms of, first of all, a logging system where the children are able to log all of their writing in a very simple manner. It doesn't matter whether it's handwriting or done via technology. It's whatever they're choosing to do their writing on. As well as a few other resources, such as our teacher workshop series, which specifically looks at, is a series of 10 workshops that look at transforming reluctant to engaged writers. So there's a number of things, and I really encourage you to look at taking part in it, participating, and collectively, as doing our very best to rectify some of the gaps that are there in children's writing. Thank you. So I'm not sure, do we have any questions? I can see a comment from Vanessa Wilton, how her year students have really loved Storyathon, and it was a real laugh, so that's fantastic to see. And I can also see that earlier Vanessa made a comment that they're doing a writing workshop tomorrow from 5 schools, and of the 21 students coming, only 3 are boys. So we did actually see that as a bit of an issue on Storyathon, by the way. When it was early on, we saw a significantly higher percentage of girls participating in Storyathon as opposed to boys. And we then shared that with teachers, and more recently we've seen the difference there be far less. So that's very pleasing.
Cameron has come through asking where he can or she can get more information about resources on Storyathon.
Yeah, so Storyathon is just a straight Storyathon website, so storyathon.com. We had been running Storyathon every single term, but then teachers were finding that a little too overwhelming, and so we've scaled it back to once a year. It will run this year from September through to November. But we've had a number of classes write to us how disappointed they are that is not continuing every term, and so we're trying to see what we can still do next term, because the last thing that we want is to stop an enjoyable writing experience. So watch your space on that one. In terms of the writing pledge, you can go to writingpledge.com as well.
Thanks for that, Shane.
And I'd certainly encourage Tricia and anyone else to share what successes they're having in terms of the boys' mentor writing groups.
Tricia, would you be brave enough to talk about your boys' mentor writing groups?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I do love a microphone. We had some at the primary school where I worked a few years ago. We had a particularly passionate literacy teacher, and she organised some boys from the secondary school to come down to the primary school and help the boys at the primary school with their writing. But I think that most of the benefit was with the secondary school boys in seeing how they could impart what they learned and the skills that they developed onto others. You know, as you know, that with mentoring, it's often the person that's doing the mentoring that gets the most benefit. But the boys really enjoyed it, and I think, and there was quite a number of boys that opted to come. So we found it. I don't know if they're still continuing it at the school. I'm not there anymore, but there was some good gains, I think, and some good achievements and outcomes for those that participated.
Yeah, I think that's just fantastic. I love how it's coming from the high school. I mean, as Lee mentioned, this issue that we saw, or that we've seen in the data in terms of the high school students, the very clear regression in the boys data, so in their vocabulary data. It's at the same time the girls are seeing their greatest growth in terms of their flourishing. So I think any ways that we can address that. I mean, like Lee mentioned, I mean, I guess my personal thought on this one is what are the culture aspects that are occurring when the boys hit high school, and is it the situation that it's no longer cool to be a writer as a boy, and that they're actively opting out? Because we're seeing the pullback in their data, in their vocabulary use at all ability levels as well. So right through to the top quartile of boys, it's coming back. I think the mentoring one that you've said there, Tricia, is just fantastic.
I was interested to read Vanessa's comment about doing a similar mentoring program with Year 7 boys to mix with the feeder schools, but interesting to note that most of the students are girls, and I think that's fantastic, and that they'll do one for the boys next term. Yeah, teachers from all feeder schools were just asked to nominate their most talented writers. It's nice to know that their most talented writers, and I think I've read this right, Vanessa, their most talented writers are boys, although it might be a boys' school. Oh, no, and they were girls. Okay, interesting then, yeah. And that Samantha Fuller says her Year 3 boys are huge readers, but unfortunately it doesn't come across in their writing. And Cameron's saying that boys at my school don't read and therefore don't write. They describe reading as boring, often when interviewed by their parents are readers. Their parents aren't readers either. So it might be a societal thing, Shane. But Shane, did you want to comment on that societal comment?
Look, I think absolutely, and done a lot in terms of mathematics as well, and I think if you've got a situation where the parent, in the case of maths, where the parents say to their children, "Oh, you know, don't worry, I was terrible at maths," and so on, that absolutely becomes intergenerational when it doesn't have to be, and so clearly, the students who come from families where reading is absolutely a core part of the family's being have a tremendous advantage. And so in schools, and the challenge is how do we overcome that situation where those students are less fortunate in that manner, but still develop that love of writing. I'd go back another point with Anne, and I really encourage you to listen to Anne's more times when she says the value of the whimsical writing and short, sharp pieces that aren't marked, so that they're safe, they're not threatening, and just develop that love of writing. And because if you can hook the children in with that, then you can do great things. But if you never establish that love, then you're unlikely to get very far.
Yeah, and this sounds like a plug for Storyathon, but it's definitely not. But the magic behind Storyathon is that challenge to write a 100-word micro story. So the challenge in itself, that sort of like gaming element, Shane, I think is a really great device, and it's actually great to hear that some schools are disappointed that you want to reduce the amount of events throughout the year. There's a couple of comments here about, for example, if they're not motivated to write, they could first record their writing orally, which I think is a terrific idea. And I know, Shane, that you're a big advocate of actually, using oral mentors with kids writing, where they're actually reading great exemplars to give kids examples of what a good piece of writing sounds like. And you do that in Writing Legends.
Absolutely, and maybe if also in the writing ones, get them writing in teams, and everyone's got to contribute, and and that obviously can start at a very young age in terms of, again, the teachers modeling great writing, sort of at the year 1, year 2 level, in terms of, okay, we're going to collectively write a story, and away we go, and so any of that is very beneficial.
Yeah, and Tricia has the same idea too, where she said, she's talking about doing rapid writing, 10-minute rapid writing with kids to get their drafts down really quickly, and that's a nice challenge in itself.
And it also conveys to the students that the writing doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about what Anne was saying about how, writing as a process is a very complex process. And if you read Tessa DeFern's work too, she talks about writing being an incredibly complex process. So it's actually great to see a teacher up in the front of the classroom or in a small group grappling with that writing process and stumbling through some things sometimes, speaking out loud the strategies that she or he is, trying to dig deep for to get out what they want to actually write about. So I love seeing imperfection in other people. It makes me feel better.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the easiest tips as a teacher, if you're fearful of making any mistakes, just intentionally make quite a few and build that in as part of the process. So it's always to the student in terms of pick the mistakes, and they never know whether it was intentional or unintentional.
Yeah. And I think on that note, we don't want to keep you for longer than what we've scheduled this event for. It's 4:46. We'd like to thank you very much for joining us. If you've got questions that you want us to answer, or comments or strategies or tips that you want to share with one another, and when you want to use us as a messenger, then please send them through, because we'd love to share them with you all. But on behalf of Shane from Schoolbo, Storyathon, Writing Legends and Oxford University Press, thanks for joining us today, and we hope you've got some nice little nuggets of knowledge out of what we've talked about.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.